Bias. What does that word mean for you? I want to share with you my personal story about the pain, paradox, and power of bias. I was a sophomore in high school. After an excruciating morning of algebra, I couldn't wait to sit down and enjoy my lunch. The only thing standing between me and food was a quick stop to my locker to drop off my books. That's when I saw it. A big, ugly note taped to my locker door. It read, "Go back to your country." The words felt like a vicious assault that cut through my psyche like a knife. Instantly, I felt fear and a rage simmering inside of me. It shook me to my core. By the way, this is my country. I was born here, but that's besides the point. The sting was real regardless. Lunch was a blur of confusion, hurt, and pain. I don't even remember eating. I just remember being at a carousel where you put your trays up after you're done, and a girl started to make fun of me. She called me a dot head while pointing to her head, and I just snapped. Lost it. It took 3 people to hold me back. And yet, once again, I was the only one suspended and sent home from school. It was so unfair. This wasn't the first time I'd gotten in trouble for sticking up for myself, and it wouldn't be the last. When I think back to my childhood, I remember asking my parents some really tough questions. They were immigrants from India. We were the only Indian family in a predominantly Italian neighborhood in Chicago. I remember asking them, why are they making fun of your accent? Why are they vandalizing our home with toilet paper and graffiti? And why am I getting in trouble for defending myself? These conversations were never easy, not for my parents, not for me. Sometimes they didn't know what to say. Other times my dad would say, just ignore them, Sejal, or he would tell me to take the high road. I learned how to use my words. I learned how to stand up for myself, and I figured out when it was better for me to just walk away. But I still struggled to find the answers to my many whys. That night that I got suspended from school, I remember crying myself to sleep. I mean, the pain and injustice of bias, pure agony. I fell asleep thinking about several conversations I'd had with my dad where I felt broken like this before. The next morning was a turning point for me. After I woke up, I laid in bed for several hours just replaying those same conversations in my head. And I remembered his words of kindness, not anger, of compassion, not aggression, of civility, not revenge against those kids. He taught me 2 very important lessons about the paradox of bias. He would say, you know, Sejal, when people are hurting those around them, they themselves are hurting inside. And then he would remind me that we're all capable of being hurtful and treating others badly. That morning, I was left with the same choice that you've probably been left with at some point in your life. I can choose to be a victim, or I can choose to rise up and somehow find a place of compassion for those kids. I share my story and these lessons with you because I know I'm not the only one that's ever felt like an outsider. I'm not the only one that's felt overlooked, ignored, or harassed. Haven't you? We throw around the word inclusion quite a lot these days, and I wonder if we spend enough time reflecting on what it feels like to be excluded. We've all been there, and it hurts. And I'm willing to bet that we don't want that for ourselves or be the one to inflict that on others. I've talked to 60-year-olds that remember the name of the kid that tormented them back in grade school. It's the kind of pain that lingers with us for a lifetime. And these same people remember the name of that one person that stood up for them in 4th grade. I know I do. Inclusion isn't a nice to have, it's a must have. Belonging is a powerful human need for all of us. You know, my dad was right. He would always joke around about how I was destined to be a lawyer because I asked why all the time. I mean, I admit, I was pretty relentless. I did become a lawyer, and guess what? Asking why is still one of my favorite questions. But here's the paradox in my story. I went from being a victim of bias to now defending people who were accused of hurting others. My father helped me see that bias is not one-dimensional. The pain of bias impacts all of us. I've spent a majority of my legal career representing people who were accused of harassing and discriminating. And this is the part of my journey where I learned about the power of bias. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been a victim of somebody else's bias? How did that feel? Have you ever been accused of being biased? How did that feel? If you're like most people, it feels terrible to be a victim of somebody else's bias, and it also feels terrible to be accused of being biased. We don't like to think of ourselves as being biased. We like to think we can manage our bias, but it's just not that simple. Scientists have found that our brain processes close to 11 million pieces of information per second. How much of that do you think is consciously processed? Only 50. So while we like to think that we're being thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional, our conscious thinking is actually a very small part of what drives us. How we act towards someone, whether it's favorably or unfavorably. How we interpret what we see and what we hear. Who we believe or disbelieve. And how we make important decisions in our lives is largely based on how we apply our past experiences to our current situation and what attitudes and worldviews we've been exposed to in our lives. Most of this happens without us even realizing it. It happens unconsciously. Bias occurs because we're all hardwired to make automatic judgments about every single person that we meet. Did you know that within the first 7 seconds of meeting someone, you make 11 judgments about them? Some of the first things we notice about somebody is their race, their age, and their gender. And then without even realizing it, unconsciously, our mind associates those characteristics with other characteristics, like wealth, education, social status. By the way, people can be biased about anything, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, how tall you are, what you wear, what kind of music you like. It could be anything. These snap judgments that we make about others are oftentimes incorrect and harmful to those around us, especially when we're dealing with people that are different than us. And then we go on to try to find evidence to confirm our initial impressions of that person, whether or not those were true. This is the unconscious power of bias to control our thoughts and behaviors. The problem is we can't manage our bias until we learn about what they are. And most people shut down the minute they hear the word bias. The word has become vilified, shunned, and stacked with shame. A huge paradigm that prevents us from making progress is this unfounded notion that only ill-intentioned or morally flawed people have bias. This couldn't be further from the truth. I believe it's imperative that we change our perspective on the word bias and our expectations of each other. It starts with each and every single one of us. The first step is to understand your own biases more deeply. As you do, you can manage them through your current beliefs. I want to share with you a process that I use to manage my own bias in meaningful ways. I'm a visual person. I like to connect my words with images to keep my most important thoughts top of mind. With that, I want you to imagine a hat. I mean, after all, that's where a hat sits, on top of our mind. Think about what a hat means to you. It could be a uniform to connect people in teams. It could be a fashion statement for men and for women. Hats also protect us. It keeps the scorching sun off our face, and it also keeps us warm when it's freezing cold out in the winter. We wear many hats in our lives, and I want to add one more to your collection that you can take anywhere and everywhere that you go. HAT is an acronym for hold off, ask why, and take action. Hold off. When you find yourself having strong or immediate reactions about someone, especially when your response or opinion is negative, hold off. Look for objective facts rather than just relying on your initial impressions or assumptions that may or may not be accurate. Ask why, like you did when you were a child, to rekindle your curiosity. Commit to approaching conversations with an inquiring mind, with the spirit of empathy and understanding before you jump to conclusions or judge others. And when you find yourself judging others, stop, ask yourself why, and analyze how you're reaching your conclusions. And then take action. It doesn't have to be complicated. The golden rule says that we should treat others in the way that we want to be treated. Personally, I prefer the platinum rule better. It says to treat others in the way that they want to be treated. As you practice wearing your hat, you'll be able to choose your behaviors and your beliefs. You can choose awareness over ignorance. You can choose understanding over judgment, acceptance over rejection, and you can choose inclusion over exclusion. I have an 8-year-old son named Shane, and he means the world to me. I know I can't protect him from experiencing bias in his life or from experiencing the pain and injustice I felt at that locker so many years ago. And I also know that he's going to develop his own biases as he grows older. But wearing our hat is a staple in our home. And I know his special hat will keep him warm when he feels the effects of other people's bias, which can seem bitterly cold at times. Wearing your hat is a personal choice, but I hope you'll wear your hat every single day. Maybe even tip it to those that you meet along your way as you bond in more meaningful relationships. It will help to free you from the pain of bias, to help you truly understand the paradox of bias, and to give you the power to empower you to deal with your bias in a whole new way. The choice is yours, only yours.